Hey there, boils and ghouls. Welcome to another episode of Hollow Weekly, where this week George and I interview Andrew Kasch. Now, this guy has some pretty cool work under his belt. He is the director and editor of the amazing documentary, Never Sleep Again, The Legacy of Elm Street, which is 4 hours of pure bliss. Just all the nightmare, all the Freddy Krueger knowledge you'd ever want. You get it right there. It's a one-stop shop for all your nightmare needs. He is also one of the amazing creative forces behind the wonderful anthology. And that's coming from a guy I could probably talk about a few Tales from the Crypt episodes on repeat, who loves his anthology. Tales of Halloween. Now, if you like the anthologies, you cannot go wrong with this one. He's one of the guys behind that. He has a segment with John Skip. This Means War. It's so fucking, it gives you, it's the Halloween juice you need. And spoilers in this episode. Just yesterday, we interviewed him. Tales of Halloween Blu-ray was up for a Saturn Award. And after the interview, he went to the award ceremony. And just to update everyone, he did, in fact, well, he did. They did win the Saturn. So that makes him two-time Saturn winner. And after you're done immersing yourself in the Elm Street Legacy and watching some good anthologies and Tales of Halloween, you can also check out his work on the CW's Legends of Tomorrow. He's an editor on that show, and if you're like me, you love the CW superhero stuff. So enjoy the episode, stay spooky.
First thing I want to know is what got you into horror?
Wow. It's weird. I grew up in a very fundamentalist community where my dad was the pastor of a church, and we were kind of sheltered from the outside world, and it was in Florida of all places. I don't know. Halloween and things like that were forbidden. And when you're a kid, all that forbidden stuff, you kind of naturally gravitate towards. I always wanted to celebrate Halloween, but I wasn't allowed to. It was combine that with the few movies I was allowed to watch, which was King Kong or a Godzilla movie or something. At a very young age, I just sort of really gravitated towards monsters. So when I was able to finally break free of that sort of tight religious control, I just kind of went nuts and dived into the scene and rented everything that I could from the video stores. Did those great 80s and 90s video store purges, and being America Online to try and track down VHS bootlegs of Evil Dead because you couldn't find it anywhere. Pretty much before all DVD and the digital boom made everything that ever was made available to you pristinely, you had to seek out through magazines and books and the archaic days of the internet. You had to seek out this shit and find it, and it became these weird little quests. And so that was kind of the chase was kind of addictive too.
You were sort of like Nicolas Cage in National Treasure trying to find the Evil Dead.
Exactly what it was like. It's just I know there's a copy of Evil Dead 2 out there somewhere. I need to see this movie. So that became a huge thrill, and inevitably, with any horror fan, you read Fangoria and sort of start to learn about the business. It's you become obsessed with the craft of all this stuff, the makeup effects artists, and kind of what goes into it. So, my story is pretty much the same as most monster kids my age.
Do you remember the first viewing of A Nightmare on Elm Street?
Yeah, I got a VHS from some local video store. And that Freddie and Jason were everywhere back in the day, but I was forbidden to watch any of that stuff. And when I finally was of the age where I could like break away and found my window, Elm Street was one of the earliest horror titles that I sort of rented on my own, and that had a huge impact on me because it was like in a very anxiety-driven horror movie. For me at the time, it was like I loved the imagination and the effects and the characters and all that, but I think what really like hit me hard was just the sheer anxiety of what was going on in that movie. Not necessarily like in the dream world, but like with all the adults, trying to control their children and being a kid, being stuck in a helpless situation where everybody's trying to get you to go to sleep. That was, and maybe that had to do with sort of like my controlled religious upbringing, but that like kind of struck a weird primal fear in me when I saw it at the time. So that was kind of always the element that stuck with me.
Oh, that's so awesome. So what was the spark that became the idea of Never Sleep Again?
Well, I mean, at the time, I'd spent a few years working with Dan Farrens. We had met on a documentary that he was directing at the time called His Name Was Jason. And I was sort of like a fresh face in LA at the time. And he had hired me to help put together do some light editing on it. And the production just went to hell. Like it was mismanaged. There were people involved that turned it into something far less than it should have been. And it was like I just kind of like as a horror fan was sitting there with Dan watching everything unravel and just being frustrated. And the doc turned out pretty terribly. And Dan and I were just sort of like the guys left over after that experience going, damn it, that sucked. That could have been really good. And then immediately afterwards, as luck would have it, Paramount hired us to do the Friday the 13th special edition, starting with the final chapter, part 4. So Dan and I went to this company and we spent about a year doing, I think 4 through 8, like all the documentaries and bonus features. And I was digging through the vaults at Paramount, trying to find every last scrap of film that there was, in their archives. We were trying to do things like dig up the old footage from part 7 that was cut. And only finding memos that stuff was destroyed. But we got to do a lot of cool stuff. Like I unearthed alternate takes of like the Crispin Glover dance and we had a blast like on those. I think we pretty much worked for a solid year on those discs. And then we did other things like for a movie that Dan produced called The Haunting in Connecticut. So At the time, and we did, and those were like successful discs and won some awards and things. And afterwards, we were like, okay, well, what do we do now? And as luck would have it, I mean, His Name Was Jason was sort of made to come out and capitalize on the Friday the 13th remake that they were doing. And at that time, the Elm Street remake was on the horizon. And we had all of our crew guys in place. We were sort of a well-oiled documentary machine at the time. And so we went out and just kind of decided to pitch it. And nobody bit. And I kind of pulled Dan aside and I was like, you know what? Fuck it. We've got all the materials. What's stopping us from just doing this micro budget thing and doing it ourselves?
That's so cool.
And we can get this out we've got 9 months before the remake comes out. Let's just do this. Let's just jump right in.
And that's so fitting because that's so Bob Shaye, Wes Craven style from the original. Same spirit.
And it was sort of like, okay, we got a handful of people who can help us. Let's and we know we know what we're doing. So let's just give this a shot and see. We don't fuck asking for permission. So we started that. We had gotten our producer Tommy Hudson on board, who was good friends with Heather Langenkamp, and when Heather we sat down with her, talked about it, and once she agreed to lend her name to the doc, we were kind of like, okay, we have like something, we have a footing now, like somebody major from the franchise involved, and let's just go. So we drew outlines and mission statements and kind of how we wanted to do it. And originally it was going to be a 90-minute documentary. We were just like, yeah, we'll make this, it'll be like down and dirty and quick and easy. And we started just booking interviews in this little hole in the wall and just to see who we could get. And at the time, we didn't have Bob Shea, we didn't have Wes Craven, we didn't have Robert Englund. We had nobody but Heather. And so we were just bringing in whoever we could schedule locally, like writers or actors from the series. And we just started. And that was kind of terrifying because it's like, well, what if we don't get Robert Englund, or what if we don't get Wes Craven, or this isn't going to be much of a documentary. But we kind of just said, whatever, throw caution to the wind. And then 2 months later, we had over 100 interviews.
Jeez. Jesus.
So you did not sleep during the making of Never Sleep Again.
No, that was the running joke during the entire. I think we all pretty much virtually killed ourselves because we had to. I mean, just to give you an idea of how complicated documentaries are to put together. People spend years editing documentaries, and we put together, and that's like a normal documentary, like a normal 90-minute to 2-hour thing you might see on Netflix. Mm-hmm. People in the editing bay for years, and we had over 100 interviews and God knows how many hours of footage, and we had to come up with something in the space of like 3 months. So
oh my God.
I didn't sleep. I was grinding away. Everyone told me that I was like near death by the time it was over. Dan looked like he was near death. Like, I've never pushed my body or my mind that far in my life. And it was like, it's a weird, horrible blur of just like grinding away and not seeing anybody and just the way everybody sort of who was involved with it kind of speaks in hushed tones about like what that process was like and how nobody should ever push themselves that far. And by the time it went out into the world, we didn't even know what we had. Like, we were just kind of done, I guess. And it was like, Jesus, is anybody going to watch this thing? What the, this is like, we're dead. What is this thing? What the fuck did we make? Maybe this was a bad idea. And
when did the whole idea of the narration, the framing device, the transitions, did you have that in mind the whole time, or was that born out of necessity after the interviews?
No, we always knew that we wanted Heather to narrate it from the beginning, So the transitions were always kind of built in. They were always sort of like a natural part of it, like kind of in our outlines. That was always sort of what we wanted to try.
Cause that's so cool. Like it's, rewatching it, I got a little creeped out watching the documentary, which does not happen to me watching documentaries, but it's got like an atmosphere and a tone that really syncs up with the subject. Like, there's so many parallels back and forth, but which is really cool to me.
That's great. I'm glad. We were trying to get some sort of like spooky atmosphere going. I never really knew if we were successful at that. We were just trying to capture the imagery of the series and I don't know, maybe give you a little bit of that spookiness. But it was more of like an aesthetic choice. So I'm actually glad to hear that.
Well, one of the things is, like, the best horror movies, one of the reasons you get creeped out or whatever is you're so invested in the characters. And this documentary, like, everyone's likable and they're all working so hard, like the people making Nightmare. And can you talk a little bit about the difference between trying to get people to participate in a documentary about Nightmare as opposed to trying to get people to participate in a documentary about like Friday the 13th?
Well, see, that's kind of the interesting thing is like, I think it was easier on the Elm Street side because I think it was a little bit more driven by passion from everybody than Friday the 13th. I think it was driven more by dollars. And I think, while they did not to say that the people who were involved with Friday the 13th weren't passionate about it. Some people were. Other people are kind of like, oh, that's the embarrassing thing in my life that I don't really want to talk about. Certain people, not everybody.
Sure.
Obviously, the core people behind it, a lot of the directors and all the actors who played Jason are like super passionate about it. But it's a little bit more of that exploitative factory kind of thing mentality that was involved with that. I think with Elm Street, they were really trying to reinvent themselves throughout the making of that series, and some things worked and some things didn't, but they would always like take risks, and everybody who was involved with those movies felt like they got to really be creative and have a voice and do things that they wouldn't normally get to do. So there's an intellect behind that series, I think, that you miss with most horror franchises. So I think it's that's the big difference that I saw, and just sort of how people remembered those movies who were involved with the Elm Street series. How people remembered them, I think they look back at their experiences more fondly than sort of like maybe more the grindhousey, like low budget grind that the Friday the 13th movies were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seemed. I mean, honestly, from your documentary, it seemed like they were batting 1,000%. It seemed like everyone wanted to talk about it, and no one was embarrassed that they had been part of it.
No, honestly, I can't think. Even the people who had bad experiences were very open about it and how much they loved that franchise, and how much it meant to them at the time to be a part of it. But honestly, like there wasn't bitterness from anybody. Like everybody seemed to be sort of happy that they got to play in that world, whether it worked or not,
That's
cool.
What I really liked. They were all super positive about it. Like there was nothing negative about it. Like, hey, we tried something new. Did it work? I don't know, but we gave it a shot and we had a good time making it. I love that attitude.
Who's the funniest person in Never Sleep Again?
Who was the funniest person? Brendan Fletcher cracked me up a lot. The guy who he was in Freddy vs. Jason. He was an actor I always thought was really amazing. Oh God, what other movies was he in? He was in the Ginger Snaps movies. He was in.
Oh yeah.
God, he's been in a shitload of. His face instantly if you saw him. Brendan Fletcher cracked me up. Who else? Joel Soisan, who was the producer of Part 2, who kind of like, he talks about, he makes a lot of the great gay jokes. Were about him directing the shower scene and saying like, what was I thinking? He slayed me. He was so unbelievably funny. He was one of my favorites for sure. Rennie Harlan was a blast. Like that was a really fun interview to do. And he was cracking jokes the whole time.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's hard to like remember like out of the 100 people.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
from like 7 years ago, the 100 or so people. But there was there were some definite highlights.
Did anybody that you interviewed take you like completely by surprise? Like their personality was completely different than you expected going in, or was everyone pretty much what you thought?
I never really knew what to expect from anybody aside from Robert Englund, who you'll say like 2 words to, and then he'll talk for 3 hours. So outside of that, I didn't really know. I went in with no expectations of who these people were. So I just kind of like, I think both Dan and I just would like try and connect with them on a human level and just make it feel like a conversation instead of like just hurling questions at them.
Sure. That's a great approach. You had a good experience shooting some merchandise thing with Robert Englund, didn't you?
We went to his house because Robert collects every weird Elm Street oddity that he sees. So he's got tons and tons of stuff. And when we were diving into like the whole weird ass merchandising that happened with Freddy Krueger, I mean, he's got stuff that he picked up all over the world. So we went to his place to shoot B-roll, and he was pulling stuff out of his closet like, hey, here's this weird Valium bottle I got in Russia. And various like odds and ends that were just so bizarre. So yeah, that was cool to like spend a day at his place, just like, you know, basically like almost like a weird thrift shop of him like pulling, let's see what's here. Oh, look at this.
It's so cool that he's so enthusiastic.
Yeah. Oh God. He's pretty much like one of the most passionate. A lot of these guys tend to get really jaded, you know, like, oh, I could have been this. I'm only known for this, you know, and Robert's not that kind of a guy at all. Like he's had a really crazy career, and adores his fans and adores his reputation. And for a guy who likes to talk so much about everything, you know, the fact that he's had this opportunity, like, I don't think it ever wears out. He talks enthusiastically about his stories, you know, now that he did when he was probably telling the same stories to people in the makeup chair 20 years ago.
Oh, that's awesome. So on Krueger, do you have a preference over the funny Freddy or the darker Freddy?
I prefer the darker Freddy. You know, I like the funny Freddy when it was like a tone bounce, like when they struck that right bounce in part 3. I don't think they ever really I don't think they ever got that bounce right again after that. I mean, funny Freddy definitely has some crazy moments that you love, but I prefer the dark version.
Me too.
Yeah, that's across the board.
But you're right about the balance. I think, I mean, like most Nightmare people, my favorite always toggles between the first and the third, and the third was where that balance really was right. Is so good.
Kind of went off the rails after that, but it's, yeah, I think if you ask most Freddy fans, they prefer the darker version or the more bounced version as opposed to like the Looney Tunes bouncing off the wall one.
Right, yeah, for sure. When you were putting together Never Sleep Again, did you discover any unused ideas or scripts or directions the franchise could have gone that you wish they had tried?
God, yeah. I mean, there was tons of them. I mean, the two biggest ones were, I think, the original Dream Child script, which you know, I think on a conceptual level, I think was much better than what they turned it into, because that one dived a lot into Freddy's origins in the insane asylum, being sort of like growing up. You would essentially it had Alice going into Freddy's dreams, and you saw glimpses of his backstory where, you know, he was the bastard son of 100 maniacs in this mental asylum church place, and like basically grew up in this church with horrible nuns that were abusing him because he was such a bastard, and that was like turning that kind of like set him down the serial killer path. And there were a lot more, I think, inventive set pieces. Like there was a set piece where like there was an artist character and her who there was basically an amazing scene, probably the best scene in Elm Street history that was unrealized. But she has this magnificent death scene where her entire loft comes alive. So there was stuff like, you know, in Beetlejuice with sculptures, like stop motion sculptures coming to life and attacking. You know, her paintings would come to life. and Attack, and it was sort of like a crazy mixed media thing, which was going to combine like animatronics and stop motion animation and 2D animation. So it was a much more extravagant version of what ended up becoming kind of that silly comic book sequence in the movie. That would have been probably like the ultimate surreal nightmare set piece had they done that. And there was that, and there was Peter Jackson's Freddy's Dead, or Nightmare on Elm Street 6, Part 6 as it was called, but basically with the old decrepit Freddy who like nobody took seriously anymore, and kids would like, basically themselves out and beat on him in the dream world. And then finally he manages by accident to kill one of the kids and get power back and start to rise up, because that was playing, I think, off of like Freddy Krueger's the fact that he was played out in the media and that it kind of became a joke. Like, I think the idea behind Peter Jackson's movie was play that up a little bit to where nobody takes him seriously, and then that would reawaken him and sort of give us that horrible dark Freddy back. So those were the two things that jumped out at me the most.
That is so cool. That makes me so mad that wasn't made.
Both of those make me so sad.
Freddie as Inspector Clouseau is just awesome. Oh yeah, that's amazing.
Oh, that would have been so perfect.
One of the things that I like horror trivia. Like, we put together trivia questions for the podcast and stuff, and one of the things that really struck me in Never Sleep Again was, the horror author question is, do you ever scare yourself while writing, right? But the movie version of that is, do you ever get scared on set filming it? And there's this great moment in Never Sleep Again where they're talking about the rotating room and how terrifying it was to be in the rotating room. Like, those interviews were really magnetic. Was the rotating room like a really centerpiece for the documentary for you for that segment?
Well, just based on the crazy stories of what happened, especially when like the room malfunctioned during Johnny Depp's scene and just started like spinning out of control, whenever time to do the blood gag, and like basically like everyone's like the crew guys are in there screaming as this whole thing is like spinning around and around and around and around, blood's going everywhere and dousing the with like that's the kind of shit that is so kind of makes for the stories.
That was set today.
Just the visual of the box as they were building it is terrifying. You're looking at it and thinking no one should step foot in there.
I wish filmmakers, low budget filmmakers, had the ability to build and do that kind of stuff these days. But unless you're Christopher Nolan, I don't think
it's funny.
It's funny you mentioned that. When I was watching that part, I was thinking about how when Inception came out, people were just losing it over that scene, and I'm like, man, they got you beat years ago. Out of all the nightmare films, do you have a personal favorite?
I think part 3 is my personal favorite. I love 1, obviously. New Nightmare, I think, is really underrated. Just how meta and original that thing was. And I've kind of grown a weird fondness for 2 over the years. It's a movie I never really liked, but the more I watch it, the more I kind of appreciate how weird it is. So, and even the worst ones have moments,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I kind of go along with most of the fans, I guess. 1 and 3 are my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing a series on our podcast that we call How Low Can We Go, where we're trying to prove Rotten Tomatoes wrong, reviewing one movie, each percentage points down from 59% to 0, and trying to enjoy them. And I'm really starting to, figure out like how horror movies get, estimated by critics and whatever. And then out of curiosity, I looked at Never Sleep Again. It's 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's insane. Did you have any idea when you released this that the critical reception was going to be like that?
No, we didn't even know if it would find any audience or that anybody would like it or watch a 4-hour documentary on this thing. Like we were so just dead tired and just like, scared and be like what did we do?
What's it like during that ride as the reviews come in? Are you paying attention to them?
Yeah, we read every single thing. and that was, and in a weird way, that was kind of like, has spoiled me ever since then, because nothing I ever do will ever get that kind of acclaim ever again, where it's just like top to bottom perfect scores across the board from everyone. It was like, that, when I've done stuff since, that's sort of been a rude awakening of like, oh, okay, not everyone's gonna love. So, it was, it was very validating to see the first wave of reviews come out and claim build and build and build, and the fact that it's had this crazy reputation over the years is like, that's something that nobody really plans for, but if it happens, then awesome. And so it was a good thing to experience. It's funny you mentioned Rotten Tomatoes. I fucking hate Rotten Tomatoes.
So do we.
Yeah, that's the worst thing. That like the IMDb was bad enough with their stupid user ratings and stuff. I think those things are like all toxic to the film culture, and I think Rotten Tomatoes basically. It's just this horrible thing that puts stigmas on everything, and I hate it.
That's exactly why we're tilting at windmills like Don Quixote style, just because it's so irritating to me that even exists and that it functions that way, because when whoever gets the idea to take mediocrity and aggregate it, such a bad recipe for.
Well, yeah, it also stopped us from watching, or at least me, a good amount of films that we're now watching from the series. I'm like, well, goddamn, I didn't watch The Exorcist 3 for how long?
Right. And it's amazing.
Some of my favorite movies have rotten scores on there, and it's just it's because and because it's only mainstream critics. I mean, mainstream critics don't know shit. I'm sorry.
You're right.
When it comes to genre stuff, they're the last people you should ever listen to. So
yeah, and then 20 years later, they write appreciation pieces for the stuff they crapped on during the.
Exactly. That's how. If you were paying attention to Rotten Tomatoes now, like back in the day, like, oh, Blade Runner's rotten. Fuck that movie. I'm not going to go watch that. It's just it's completely. It's so stupid and so shallow. And it just plays into this whole stupid clickbaity generation where, if you follow, I feel sorry for anybody who actually uses that as a barometer for what they watch, because you miss out on so much great art if you do.
Totally agree. Like, we were mapping out our watch list and we were like, I wonder if we're going to be watching a lot of bad movies, and then we're like Event Horizon, like Exorcist 3,
Monster
Squad. 2,
Squad.
we're like Monster Squad. We're like, we're fine.
We're good. This will be easy.
This site is terrible.
I say that as somebody whose few movies that he's done all have really good Rotten Tomato scores. Like, I still hate them. So this is like a jaded. Fuck you, man.
You're in a good position to shit on him.
You can speak from authority. Well, a principle's a principle.
Yeah. Well, speaking of other films that have good reviews, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Tales of Halloween, because I'm a big anthology nut. Like anything that's like short horror, I'm a sucker for it. Just give me an IV of short horror and I'll be fine. So I'm curious, how did you get on board to direct a segment on Tales of Halloween?
It kind of started as a party conversation with Axel Carolyn and Adam Girosh and I. We were at like a friend's birthday party, and I know Axel had been going around talking like, I want to do a horror anthology with my friends, and she just she had said that at the party, and Girosh and her and I were like, that's a good idea. Let's do that. What are you doing tomorrow? So,
awesome.
So we met. The three of us met at our friend's sadly now defunct Jump Cut Cafe in the Valley here, and just started writing down lists of filmmakers. And she was like, "We should do one on Halloween, and who can we get in our circles?" And so we just started making lists of people. And then I think it was like a month and a half or 2 months later, after like Neil Marshall and Darren Balsman had agreed to do it, like Epic Pictures, a very small budget company here in Hollywood, just, I think they saw specifically those two names and were like, yes, let's do this. And they had just done Big Ass Spider for Mike Mendez. Once Mike came on board as a producer and a director, he was able to take the project to them and convince them. And it's so funny because I think almost all of us were involved in Big Ass Spider at some point. Like we had all done little cameos for him in that movie. Mm-hmm. So that was like Epic wanted to sort of take it to the next level and do this sort of like fun Halloween horror film. And that's kind of like how it started. Like before we knew it, we were meeting in, Neil and Axel's backyard and like hashing out ideas. And it was, I think the idea behind it was like, this was going to be a big communal group effort. And we wanted to like give as much of a through line through it as we could and work really hard to like be in the shared universe. So that's it all happened ridiculously quickly.
So where did the idea for This Means War come from? Because I just did a video when I was back home visiting family, going through my old Halloween decorations. So then I watched that and I was like, yeah, Halloween decorations are pretty personal. You don't want to fuck with people.
And fucking hard, as we found out when it came time to make that. Building a haunt is a Halloween yard display is no easy task. Essentially, it just came out. I mean, we had a lot of pitches, and I've always been like a haunt lover, and whether it be like like local haunts or theater attractions or just yard displays, like that's kind of my jam. So we had an earlier pitch that was set in like a Christian hell house that the devil had taken over, and a few other like little ideas, and they didn't really like them. So then I'd like the idea of like, well, I really love Halloween decorations. What if we have a scenario where neighbors are battling over their displays for like supremacy? And my partner John Skip was like, oh yeah, well, what if one of them is a like an old school, like famous monsters, like, black and white sort of horror fan, and the other is like the Rob Zombie sleazy boobs and gore kind of display in there, and it's like the generations fight off, and it was like, and everyone from top to bottom was kind of like, yes, this needs to be made.
Have you killed any neighbors over Halloween decorations?
No, I wouldn't kill anybody over. Might kill them over Christmas decorations.
A good choice.
The other thing I want to know is, what was it like collaborating? Like once everyone shoots their short, what's it like collaborating with all those artists into making one big anthology film?
Hard.
This is coming from a guy who did a 4-hour documentary. So.
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. You've got 11 filmmakers. You got 11 writer directors. It's gonna be hard, no matter how close and how tight you are. It's gonna be really hard. And as we kind of found out, we got through it. I think we have a product that we're largely proud of. I think as we found out through the process and afterwards, I mean, there's so many different, especially in recent years, there's so many horror anthologies where they bring on lots of directors for segment. I think we kind of found out later that like we might have been the only horror anthology with multiple directors that still talk to each other and still hang out.
Friendships on the line.
Nothing shows you who your friends are quicker than making a movie with them. And that just goes with any production, when you go to war. So the fact that we all came out the other end, buddies and not like having murdered each other. I think is especially with that many different personality types, and on a sort of like a out of control, low budget guerrilla film shoot. I think that's kind of a miracle.
Yeah.
Well, you keep having weird parallels where art imitates life. I mean, the name of your segment is "This Means War."
Buzz. But yeah, you know, and there was a lot I had to sacrifice due to crazy budget and scheduling conflicts. So,
Sure.
You know, the actual war part of it, you know, it all had to be done in one night, and you know, we got what we could. But it was. I think that one was also imagined to be a little bit more grander and long, and it kind of became a very short, simple, more simple version of what we had planned. That's the big thing that I learned from that, and I kind of give this to anybody who tries to make an anthology with multiple directors. Go first. Or go as early in the schedule. We were so late in the schedule, and the production was like back to back to back to back. So by the time they got to ours, so many of my key guys were just burnt out. They were just completely burnt out because they had done like 7 segments, like for over the course of like 3 weeks with no days off. And we were doing, you know, night shoots the whole time.
Oh god.
That makes total sense. That's good advice.
That's what I tell.
Little words of wisdom. Well, I love the film. It definitely gives me the Halloween. Like when I watched it a few days ago, it gave me like the Halloween juice that I needed to last me until
artwork
October.
on the Blu-ray is painful. I can't look at it because it just makes me want Halloween to be tomorrow.
Oh
it's
god,
so beautiful.
Yeah. And so it's speaking of the Blu-ray tonight, it's up for a Saturn Award, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm about to slap on my suit and prepare to go.
This is the second time there because it won a previous award. Never Sleep Again won a Saturn for best DVD release, right?
It did, yeah, it did. Holy crap, like 7 years ago. And that was kind of like one of the coolest moments for me, is because I had always wanted to win a Saturn Award growing up. So to actually win one for that was
that's so cool.
That's so cool.
So we'll see if tonight's 2 for 2. I don't know.
We got our fingers crossed.
We have good faith in Tales of Halloween.
I'm glad it got the response that it did. I mean, honestly, I think we were done. We survived that one, and it was kind of like, you know, we watched the movie, and I think we were all, given the chaos behind everything, I think we were all surprised, like, oh, this actually moves pretty fast, and you know, it's not a chore. You know, hey, maybe, you know, a couple people will see it, but I honestly expected it to like come and go, and that was that. So when the critical reaction hit, that again was a shocker. Like, oh, neat.
It definitely has one of the a memorable poster, because I remember one of the first times George took me to Dark Delicacies in Burbank. They had one of the Tales of Halloween poster right up next to the door. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, that looks kind of cool.
Absolutely,
get around to see that.
That poster's bitchin'. That was cool to have that kind of poster in an age of crappy posters.
Very, very true. So what are you working on right now? Is there anything that you can announce or anything that you want to talk about?
I got a couple of things brewing right now, but right now I'm more like warming up to go back to my TV show right now. I'm about to come back for season 3 of Legends of Tomorrow. So
awesome.
That'll keep me busy for the next 9 months or so. But I've got some personal horror projects, some independent stuff that I'm working on with John Skip, and just some things brewing that we're pitching around and trying to get going. So God willing, we'll get to do one of those soon.
That's awesome. And he's such a great author.
I actually wrote down my notes. He had my favorite quote in Never Sleep Again. Hell is writing for other people.
That's a twist on start.
I like it.
Yeah. This is very, very true. That perfectly sums up Skip.
And is there a way for our fans to follow you and keep up to date on your projects? Twitter or Instagram?
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Andrew Kasch. I'm very easy and accessible. So yeah, it's that's kind of I kind of keep everybody up to date through social media.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for doing this, and best of luck tonight.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Thank you. Either way, there's an open bar and we're going to get smashed. So
It's a win-win.
There's no losers tonight.
everybody wins tonight.
All right, man. Thank you so much. Have fun.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Take
Take care. Thank
Bye.
you.